Ready.
We're ready.
Welcome to the Space Between Words.
Yep.
We're back this week. Excited to be back.
Yep.
And a lot has happened in the last couple of weeks since we have had our last one. We had an election.
An election, which elections in America affect the globe. And I have so many friends in Europe that were staying up all night watching the results. So yeah, we had an election, and we're still here.
Yes.
We're still here. And what was your experience with the election this year? Okay. Leading up to it, and kind of the couple of days surrounding.
Well, I will say I am super surprised. I didn't think in my lifetime that we would ever have another clear call ever again. Like I always from, I thought it was going to be like days, because that's just kind of how it's been.
Recounts.
Yes, recounts and recounts. So I never thought in my lifetime that there would ever just be like a clear winner, which was crazy to me. And I know that it was still late, but because we're on the East Coast now, which is interesting because like now that we're on the East Coast, we're like the first polls to close, and then you have to wait so long to see what the results are. So that's interesting. But yeah, going up to the election, man, I just felt obviously the polarization of who you're going to vote for, and that defining who you are, and the high stakes of all of it. So, and then having friends from all different walks of life and really trying to walk with them in the results of like, whether that was a die hard, you're excited that Trump won, or you're crying because he won, and just being and holding that tension and realizing that both have valid celebrations and mourning. So, yeah. What about you?
Yeah, it was all that. And for me, it's a cultural moment. So I enjoyed meaning I like watching this thing unfold. And I actually like being on the East Coast.
Oh, do you?
I'm like, we get to watch it unfold versus we're at the very, very end.
Yeah.
And California is obviously a big state, so a lot of electoral votes.
Yeah.
So we know that one usually goes a certain direction.
Yes.
It was fascinating to see what the country decided. And to your point, it was clear, which was so refreshing. And honestly, my hope was that it would be clear one way or the other. Of course, I have a preference, but at the end of the day, this constant 50-50 tie and the recount, and I think we're all worn out from from the last few elections.
Yeah. So
to have a clear landslide in many ways, it's like, that's actually kind of nice.
Yeah.
And I think it does reveal the beauty of the democracy and the beauty of the people voted, and there was a huge turnout, and it was clear. And I think that was refreshing, especially for those of us that the last few elections have not been that.
It's not been that, yeah.
And it's very fascinating to see what's happened like the day after what happened in the economy, what happened in so many different spaces. Like, wow, this person, Trump, hasn't even been in the office yet, and what's happening.
Yeah.
So it's just really interesting to watch from a cultural perspective. I do think there were indications that we're leaning in this direction.
Do you?
It's just hard to trust the media because they can skew anything that's said. And so but when you look at some of the cultural shifts that have happened in America in the last few years alone, it doesn't surprise me it went in this direction.
Yeah.
As polarizing as it is. But the beauty of our democracy is every 4 years we get to vote again.
Yes.
So for the people that feel like they really have lost and they're having a really difficult time, and like you said, we have friends and people in our church and community that they feel very differently about the results.
Yeah.
And when you hear their stories, and it's like, oh yeah, that's
very valid.
I don't have that experience.
Yeah.
I don't see it the way you do, but I'm so glad to hear your perspective.
Yeah.
And so I'm grateful for our community in that we do have a diversity of thought, and we have a diversity of views.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I was asking some of our people the Sunday after the election, after church, I was saying, what informed who you and how you vote? And it was interesting, what informs them is different than what informs me.
Very much so.
And it wasn't even policies as much. It was like, this is what leads me to make a decision. I was like, my process is very different. So just acknowledging that.
Yeah.
And then the cool part is anybody that feels like, their candidate did not win, guess what? In 4 years, you get a vote all over again. And so that is the beauty of our democracy, is that. And at this point, we're not a dictatorship, so we don't have that happening in regards to someone can rewrite everything and stay in office for 20, 30 years. So I am thankful for the 4-year rotation, especially with where America's at. So, yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting to see how you voted, or at least for me, how I voted and what swayed my decisions back when I was in my 20s till now. Like it's just even that has changed. So giving space for people at different age groups, because what is important then is going to be very different than what's important now, and what you're going to vote for and what's So it's interesting.
And looking at the election map of how many places went red that was blue last time.
Yeah.
That's like, wow, that's a big cultural shift.
It is a big cultural shift.
And it'll be interesting how this plays out.
Yeah.
And it's very, watching who Trump is appointing for all the different positions. Like it's going to be interesting to see how it goes.
It'll be interesting.
Some of it's exciting. I'm like, oh, we're about to find out. But again, we get to vote again in 4 years. So anyways, so for anybody out there that your candidate won, congratulations. The candidate that didn't win, in 4 years you get to vote all over again. And that is the beauty of our democracy.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's important, right? To, I think what's been kind of crazy for me is the power that we give. And I understand that the president has power. I get that. But the power that we're giving the presidential role in our own lives to someone who will never know your name, will not sit there and vote for you in mind, right? Like, and I know that they like to make you think they will, but they just won't. And so it's just like, hey, it's okay. 4 years later, you can vote again. And that's why we live in America. It's incredible. And to just breathe.
Yeah.
That's what I've just, and both sides, just breathe. That's
breathe.
my encouragement.
Yep.
So, yeah, also, I have to say, I learned something, and I think you learned something as well. I'm pulling this out really quickly because I got to give a shout out to all the AV workers in churches and in concerts and all of the things. Because we found out that...
And AV means audiovisual.
Yes.
Anybody running sound, video, lights. Yeah.
Any of them. But we found, or I don't know, I thought this was so interesting because I had no idea.
None.
But Evan, our main dude here, shared with us that if...
Main dude. You're the main dude.
You're the main dude. I love it. I'm calling you out. Anyways, looking good over there, by the way. And but he was talking about using... wireless mics.
RF signal.
Yes. And how when you're in the city that you have to be careful what frequency you're on so that you don't preach to, the planes that are flying over you. I love this.
I did not realize the mic I hold in my hand.
Yes.
There are legal frequencies and illegal frequencies. I had no idea.
No idea.
No concept of that.
That's crazy to me.
For those of you that are wondering, we were in a meeting planning an event we're planning to do in the spring, which we're excited to announce pretty soon here. And we're talking about doing it in downtown Greenville. And Evan and Misha begin to tell us, oh, yeah, there's legal free. We're like, what? I thought you just turned on a mic and it was no big deal. So anyway, yeah. Shows how naive we are.
Yes. Yeah. So I just was very thankful
Yes.
for people that know and are experts in their field that can tell me that I could get fined thousands of dollars by preaching to the fire department on the wrong.
Yeah, talking on a microphone, and that is going into an airplane flying above. I didn't know that. I didn't know that was possible.
No, but kind of cool
with a microphone.
Yes. So. Anyways, I just thought that I'd
thanks for bringing that up. That was enlightening.
It was a very enlightening.
We're looking
moment.
at each other going, all these years had no clue.
All these years. Yep. Anyways, so what are we discussing today?
Yeah, this last week I had this thought. I saw someone say it, and then it just kind of started a spiral of thinking for me. And the phrase was "look in the mirror." And I thought there's a lot going on there, and I think coupled that phrase with some situations I'm involved with as far as pastoring people, discipling, mentoring, and just some situations in our community, and just realizing there's some resonance there, and I think it has to do with. It brought up questions like why when it seemed all the indications are telling us we need to grow up, mature, change, improve, when everything is pointing in that direction, but we don't.
Wow.
Or we don't change. What are the reasons why we don't change or grow up? And just wanted to take some time and talk about that.
Okay.
And so the idea of looking in the mirror.
Look in the mirror.
And our last conversation, and I had quite a few people reach out. We talked about, or maybe it's a couple podcasts ago, about when you enter your kind of mid to late 30s and in your 40s, you hit this existential moment in your life, and you're like assessing a lot.
Yep.
You're just assessing a lot of things. And I've jokingly have said, I think in your 20s, you're the master of the universe.
Oh, 100%.
I mean, you've got life figured out. You've figured everything out. You are, you've got it dialed. And then your 30s, all of that begins to erode and corrode and implode. You're like, I actually don't know what I'm doing. I'm just trying to make it through the day, and I want to watch Netflix at the end of the day and just veg out.
Yes.
And so you think into everything in your 30s, and then your 40s, in my experience, is then one of the most beautiful times of being a human being, because you actually get to find out who you really are, which can be not fun.
No.
But it's also like, oh, this is who I actually am, and then we get to go from there.
Yeah.
So I think when we started talking about the existential assessment, late 30s and 40s, it definitely created some chatter in our DMs and comments in regards to that. And so I think looking in the mirror in this stage of life is a really good conversation to have.
No, I think it's great because I joke with some of the dancers I've worked with. You know, you get to that 18 to 25-year-old stage and it's like, man, the humility goes out the door, which I think is actually needed, even psychologically, to get out of your home and believe that you can live on your own and conquer the world. And I think it's what's needed to push you out of your parents' house into the world, which great. But there is that stage of like, I don't need your advice because I got it figured out. And then just my own journey of like my 30s, I'm like, this is great, but also I don't know a lot. And then 40 hit. And it's like, all hell broke loose. You're like, wow, okay.
Can you define that? When you say that, is that internally, externally?
Oh, it's internally, all internally. Like my dialogue is like not shutting up every morning I wake up and it's this like, okay, why do you do this? And why do you do that? And you've done this for your whole life. Do you even like that? And you're like, oh my gosh, I'm questioning cereal. No, but it's real.
You're like, why am I doing this again?
Yeah.
Yeah, you kind of, it's a reality.
It is a reality that's hard.
I'm a man, so I can only speak on behalf of men, but I would say a majority of men that I talk to that are in their mid-30s, late 30s, and early 40s, these are the dominant conversations.
Wow.
They may not be saying this, but everything they're talking about comes back to this, trying to figure out who they are, what they are, their perspectives, and I thought this is how reality is, and it's not. And so it just seems it creates this orbit. And I think it would be fun to talk a little bit about this and why looking in the mirror is actually really important, and as well as asking the question, why is it so difficult when all the indications, and if we don't pay attention to these cues, hints, and clues and indications, then potentially, don't want to say it out loud as much, but the reality is you're going to come to a point where your internal system is going to collapse or implode. Something's going to happen because you have to continue to grow in who you are. And if you don't, you kind of hit this. And I've seen people not really process that well, and they move into more rigidity in their thinking, more rigidity in their life, and they stay the same. And so a lot of thought of 50s, 60s, like, oh, you're still in your 40s or 30s. You haven't actually moved forward.
Wow. And
I believe we're designed to actually grow. So we have to wrestle with this idea of, are we okay with the idea of who I'm becoming instead of who I am?
Yeah.
And I think for me, I'm 48, so I'm approaching a decade. Like 50s is talking to me, and I'm actually really excited. I look at other 50-year-olds that have done this well. I'm like, oh, they're like loving so much about life.
Yeah.
And because they've gone through this season really well. So I'm actually looking forward to my 50s. But it's a different set of thoughts I'm having right now about being in my 50s and my emotional and mental frameworks. And so I think having a conversation like, why don't we change? And I think we have to embrace the idea like, who am I becoming? That needs to be this baseline.
Yeah.
If we settle on this is who I am, then we're kind of building a fortified city of not open to changing.
Yeah.
And I think that for men, at least from my experience and guys I interact with, there's something about late 30s, early 40s. If you can move into a mindset, who am I becoming? Then you can actually move through this season really well. But if you end up landing on this is who I am, then you in some ways have reduced yourself to that for the remainder of your life.
Yeah. So I know that we discussed this a little bit throughout this week, but when we say we're looking in the mirror, what I think is interesting is that actually can become an echo chamber if you're not okay and you don't understand that mirror can be from other people as well. So because I think what happens is that if you're only looking in the mirror and only listening to your voice and there's no community, I would say that like just out of even my own life with being 40, that internal dialogue can actually be what stifles you from growing.
It's a great point.
And it like can be like, you're good. look at you. You're fine. Like, you're doing all these things. This is what you've always done.
Define the mirror.
Define the mirror. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, we have to define what that is.
Go ahead. You define.
You want me to define it?
What is the mirror in our lives?
I mean, for me, it's my community. And it's not just the community. I wouldn't say just my friends, which I think is a big thing, but people, maybe even the mentors or people that like are one step above where I want to be. I want them. I want to know what they think, what faults they see. So I think that causes a vulnerability. And if you don't have those people in your life, man, I would really challenge you of like, who's actually speaking into you that can poke and prod and say, hey, this is a big, you're doing this on repeat constantly in your life. Maybe you need to figure out what's causing this and be able to listen and change and not just sink back in and protect yourself and build your shell. So for me, it's community, big time. So
yeah, it's your spouse.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's your kids. The kids are incredible mirrors. And the reality with that is like, oh, that's me.
Yeah.
In a 4-year-old form.
Yeah.
And so kids are incredible mirrors. And I think what's interesting for me, I've got 2 adult children, and I would say when they get to their late teens, they give you feedback their whole life. But when they get late teens, early 20s, they hopefully, at least mine did, they had more confidence to give me some feedback.
Okay.
This is how I experienced you, Dad. And I joke with people, said, you almost get a report card from your young adult kids on how you raised them.
Wow.
So our kid, we've had some really deep conversations the last 3 to 5 years of like, I had no idea. So of course, you want to repent and clean up the message and stuff. But it's really interesting. Your kids are actually some of your best sources of information, of feedback.
That's an interesting line because I know we've joked around about this a little bit, but like when you're disciplining your kids for being the very mirror that you have created, like you're disciplining them, you're like, hey, don't do this, but you're not disciplining yourself in that very area. So it's just a very interesting thing. I think that's what I have found. Like, oh, you're pushing boundaries. I push boundaries. Oh, I'm telling you not to, and I'm over here doing it. So like, I think that's that's a huge mirror, especially for those that have kids is... What are you disciplining them in?
Like if you're going to discipline your children, and that can come in so many different forms, I think it's also wise that you make sure you're growing too.
Yeah.
These humans are a byproduct of your DNA, your genetics, your emotional history, and how you function. And so I think your mirrors are your kids, your spouses, friends that are really deeply involved in your life.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to me how many people, including myself, right now, I'm involved in a couple situations where specific individual, the husband, for example, I'll speak about the one I'm thinking of. The husband is getting so much feedback from his wife and from people around him. And what it's doing to him, he is not currently in a mindset of growing. He's in a mindset of protection, self-preservation. Yeah. This is who I am. And it's really difficult to watch because you're like, they have so much data coming at them. Their mirror is aimed at them, and they can't see it. So that brings up, when you drive in a car, there's a spot called the blind spot. You can't actually see it.
Yeah.
You can have all the mirrors. Obviously, the new technology, you got cameras now, so it shows you better, but there's still that spot you cannot see. And that right there is something that we all need to just realize. There are things I do. There are behaviors, actions, thought processes
all of us have
that feel normal, but they're in a blind spot, and you don't realize you're just cutting people off and you're hitting things when you make these decisions.
Yes.
And I think for me, when you're getting information from people that are close to you, instead of rejecting it, put it in the lens of like, oh, this might be a blind spot in my life. Yeah. And especially if it's multiple sources. And I think that's where I want to encourage people when you're getting that kind of feedback from the same person. And it's interesting to get feedback from a spouse.
It's hard.
It actually can be very difficult.
Yeah.
But they're the ones that actually know you the most.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where we have to change some of our paradigms around this. Like, this is information about a blind spot in your life. Let me ask you a question. What are some reasons why you think people are unwilling to change?
So I'm going to go a little nerdy for a second and go into the science. It's interesting because when you talk stem cells, there's a reason actually that we use baby or kid stem cells to put into other bodies to rejuvenate things. And they say that as you get older, your stem cells start to lose the elasticity of like changing. And not that they can't, it just takes a lot of more information coming in to actually say, hey, you can be something different. So I think there's a comfort level. There's a like, especially for those of us that get older, of hey, this is normal. This is the way that I like things. And I think I've even seen it in friends, and we've talked about this, that are dating at this age of getting older, 30, 40, all the things. And they're saying like, my girlfriends are like, man, these guys are like, this is who I am. I'm not changing. And if you don't like it, then move on and I'll find someone else. And there's that lack of like, oh, I need to change to even grow with someone to get married. And so I think as we get older, I think you see that. I think we lose the ability to be curious. I think we lose the ability to grow. It's more of an active thing. You have to actively go after it to see change in your life. Mm-hmm. And if you don't, then like you said, you're just going to dwindle away, or you're going to have a breakdown. Something's going to break, or you're just going to end up, inside your house and watching Netflix.
Yeah, another indication for me would be when you find yourself with no margin.
Ooh.
Emotionally and mentally, when you find yourself in a constant state of no margin. And I know we live in a fascinating world right now, and that seems to be the norm, but it's evident that we're not actually mentally and emotionally processing the way we need to process. We're not designed to operate at 100% capacity all the time.
Yeah, speaking to me.
And I think we have to be more honest with, and I shared a couple episodes ago about my own breakdown.
Yeah.
And what was an interesting experience for me is, as I'm coming out of it and I'm kind of finding out who I am and getting a new operating system, I remember talking to my therapist and I said, what's weird for me, and it's hard and embarrassing, is my capacity is so much smaller than it used to be.
Wow.
And this was like some time. So it wasn't like right after I came out. It was some time, and it was like kind of get back into a fairly normal state. And I said, I'm like, I don't feel like I can do as much anymore. I can only do this much. And she said, yeah, but the problem is, the previous season, there was so much junk in there.
Wow.
And you just told yourself you can do it. Now you realize, I'm not going to do it anymore.
Yeah.
I'm only going to do. And so for me, I think recognizing this constant, my margins are so full. Sometimes changing your activities helps, but you also should be changing your internal reality.
Yeah.
How you process your emotions and your thoughts. If you just only remove activities, it doesn't actually change anything internally.
Yeah.
So there needs to be a coupling. There needs to be, okay, maybe I make some adjustments externally, how busy I am and what I've committed myself to. But at the same time, I need to actually be improving my internal abilities to process my emotions and my thoughts.
Wow.
And I would say to anybody out there, if you feel like you're losing control of your thoughts, if you are not able to close that loop and it's just constant open loop, then you might be moving towards a space where your margins are too full and your system to process emotions and thoughts is not working.
Yeah.
And it will eventually glitch on you. And so I think it's important to recognize. I love when the door chime comes
I
on.
like it. It's
if
good.
you heard the door chime,
It's awesome.
It's awesome. Anyway, I think the reality is we have to recognize if our margins are full, that's a really good moment. And I'm not talking like 2 days, 3 days. I'm talking like there's a constant state of like, I have no margin. Like it doesn't take me much to get triggered.
Yeah.
Or I don't have anything to give away anymore. We weren't designed to run at that capacity.
Man.
And I bet you there's a lot of people, I know I was one, was like, oh, when you run at that capacity, something's going to have to give.
Yeah.
Something, it's either people around you are going to feel it and you're going to feel it. And so I would say to anybody, don't wait until the system crashes. These are all indications. I think that's why I wanted to talk about this today is I felt that people I'm interacting with, like there's so many indications, and these are incredible points of data saying, hey, this isn't working anymore. But what they're hearing is, I think one of the reasons, I'll answer my own question I asked you, I think another reason why is when you don't actually trust someone else giving you information.
Yeah.
When the trust is broke down, and that could be stemmed from experiences previously, your childhood experiences, and so you're in more self-preservation mode. You're more in the mode of like, I got to protect myself, so I'm going to reject you before you're allowed to reject me. So I have to work really hard because my greatest fear is being considered inadequate to do something.
Yes.
So when you give me information that point to the idea that I'm not doing a good job, I have to work so hard to retranslate that to, oh, this person actually cares for me. They're actually I have to tell myself that.
Yeah.
And I have to do that with my wife, with my kids. Dad, I'm like, okay, no. Because if I don't retranslate it, I hear it as they're telling me I'm not doing a good enough job.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I'm going to, and I move into it, and like, no, that's not what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to be going, oh, they're actually looking out for me.
Yeah.
They're trying to help me. They're giving me clues. And so I think for people out there, when that information's coming at you, find ways to translate it to this person actually cares for me.
Yeah.
Or this person is just giving me information that I'm not fun to be with. I'm not a joy to be around. And if you can tell yourself that's what it is, then you've taken a step closer to rearranging some things and doing some work.
And I mean, I love that you said trust, because I think that's a big key right there, is not just to do this with random people in your life, but people that have a stake in your life, that actually have spent time, know you, and not to listen to a total stranger. I preface it with that, because then I think, because that is a thing. Like I'm so big on that. Like I am dot every I, cross every T. And so when someone comes and is like, hey, you made this mistake, and I'm like, oh, that will never happen again. Like ever. I will never let that happen. And then also I think that as a leader, you have to be careful, because if you walk in that, because then you tend to like not allow people to make mistakes even underneath you, because you're like, oh, that's on me. If you make a mistake, that's on me. And so I'll just do it. And then you don't have to. And that way I know I'll do it right. And it's just this weird cycle. And it's like, man, we got to break that, especially being a leader in the church. And how are we bringing people up and allowing them? We talked about the other day of our walk being a journey. And I just love that language, because it gives us space to realize, like, on a journey, who knows what's going to happen. And when you visualize, I'm just a huge visual person. And when I visualize my life as a journey and realize my walk with God is not going to be perfect, my walk of finding who I am is not going to be perfect, and allowing myself to, okay, there's people that come along your journey that are willing to help and change you, and be okay with that. And it doesn't have to look perfect and neat and all in a box, which is hard, I think, especially as I get older. I think
when we asked, in that 30, 40 stage, and it's not only there, so if you're not in that stage, it still applies to you. But instead of asking the question, not only asking the question, who am I, also ask the question, who am I becoming?
Who am I becoming?
If you only ask who am I, then it's more definitive, it's more static, it's more like this is it. But who am I becoming? It introduces you to a process, a journey of growing and becoming a better human, a better person. The other day I was driving home, and there's a big boulevard, so it was like 4 lanes and a middle lane. And this car that I was following went into the middle lane to turn into a road. And so, of course, as they pulled in the middle lane, I'm catching up, going alongside of them, but they changed their mind and came back in.
Yeah.
So, of course, I lay in the horn.
Yeah.
I'm a horn guy. It's my way of letting you know something happened.
Yes.
And I left it on for a few extra seconds. And they sped up and cut me off. And so I'm just late. And then I went around them, and they gave me a honk. And I realized that, I was trying to let them know, hey, you almost hit me.
Yeah.
You're actually in the wrong. But their knee-jerk reaction was to honk back. And I would say, when we're getting feedback, when someone's honking the horn at us in life, instead of just reacting with a horn honk back, like whatever, it's like, oh, wow, maybe I did something, I just didn't know it.
Yeah.
And this is a really good moment right now for me to take ownership of something I didn't realize I did. And I want to encourage people, like, you are getting feedback, and like people are giving you heads up.
Yeah.
So instead of honking the horn back and saying, no, it's your fault, like, I'm going to take this, I'm going to go away and figure out what this is.
That's good.
And if you're stuck in that, then get help. Like, get some help and recognize, like, I may not, because it's a blind spot, I actually don't know what it is.
Yeah.
And so those are the areas I'm trying to focus on more in my life right now. Because the ones I see, I'm like, okay, yeah, I shouldn't have done that. I'm gonna fix
those are the easy ones.
But the ones you don't see,
yeah,
you could just keep doing them. You keep cutting people off, and you have no idea.
Yeah, I think for me, what's helped me in this stage of my life is seeing my life of where I'm headed, and then looking internally and saying, okay, this is where I want to go in my journey, and then what tools do I need to actually accomplish that? And then, and even in whatever that is, in communication, whether that be my craft, whatever that looks like, and then putting myself around people that are there or doing it so that they can help me, give me the tools. Because I think some of us have this idea, and maybe this is an American thing, I don't know, but like I can do it myself. Like, and I think about like, people that are climbing Mount Everest and that they have to have a guide because it's just this crazy thing that your endurance and all the things that you're going after, you need someone that's been there to help you and kind of navigate the surroundings. And that's where I want to go. I want to go, like in my own life as a metaphor, I want to be on that top of that mountain, and I want to go to hard places. I can't do that without having people that have been there and helping me along the way. So I'm hoping that I am willing to look at those blind spots when they present them, but it is hard. And it's hard not to react and get offended. And especially if you've had any kind of trauma in your past or with leadership or leaders or even your spouse, and you're like, oh, they're telling me this, but I had this fight the other day. Like, you can't tell me that. So it's hard. I don't know. Yeah, especially when we talk about mirrors in our families, that's a hard one to swallow.
The other thing that I would say goes along with this framework of who am I becoming is realizing that my actions and behaviors are the result of something internal. And I keep bringing up different examples. I'm in a season where interacting with so many different situations.
Yeah.
And this specific situation, the husband specifically is trying to change the symptom. Oh, I won't do that again. It's like, you need to know why you keep doing that though.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we think, oh, I'm producing apples. I don't want to produce apples anymore. But until you change what's going on inside that tree, you're going to continue to produce apples. And so I think some of the ideas or the framework of who am I becoming, you have to step into this, okay, my behaviors, this thing that I'm doing in my life are because of something else. And sometimes we're trying to address the external expressions of who we are, but we're not taking the time to go, why does this keep happening? Why do I keep cutting people off?
Yeah.
Why do I keep running into people in front of me, in the car metaphor? And so going, okay, why am I doing this and doing the work to get there? Because once you start addressing the core issues, it automatically begins to change the byproduct of those issues.
That's cool.
And so that's something that we need to wrestle with as well. And that's where for me personally, I needed someone to help me get there because I could not see them. I'm like, I see the mess, and I thought it was all this, and it was nothing to do with that. This is just a byproduct of something that's broken in here, something that's not healthy in here. So I needed help to get somebody to show me that and walk me through the process. And what was interesting, once I started dealing with this, all this stuff that was coming out of me wasn't happening anymore. And I thought I was trying to fix all this. So I think that's something else to realize too, for people that are like, I'm going to change, I'm going to not do that thing anymore. Great, that's good discipline.
Yes.
But you're going to keep doing it if you don't deal with what's going on inside.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah, I think having certain, for me, stakes in my identity of like, hey, this is a core value of who I am, and that won't change. Everything else is up for grabs for me. And I think that's what's interesting is because if you don't, it becomes an identity and it becomes something of like, this is who I am. And I don't think it allows us to change. And I also think what's interesting maybe also in our culture today is that busyness is a sign of value and, oh, I'm important because I'm busy and I do all of this. And it's like self-sacrifice, and it helps us feel good, and it releases endorphins and all the things. And even like going into my realm, this past weekend I traveled and saw some old friends of mine that are still in the industry. And the first thing they ask a lot of the times is, what are you doing? Instead of how are you doing? It's like, what have you been up to? And you're like, wow, that's so interesting because you're defining me as an individual by what I do. And I know we're in the arts world, I get that, but like that's an interesting thought process for me, is that we have to stop defining ourselves by what we do so that we are allowed to change and become something better. And for those around us, I mean, our friends, our families, whatever that it looks like. So yeah.
So that's look in the mirror.
That's look in the mirror.
Look in the mirror. We define the mirror as the people around you. It's the reflection of what's coming back at you.
Yeah.
And not knee-jerk reacting with honking back, or nope. It's saying, okay, this is really valuable information. I want to walk away and figure out what's causing these blind spots to exist in my life. And then just not settling in the who am I, but moving into who am I becoming.
Wow.
Then it invites you into a journey and a process. And so I think what excites me on a personal level is who I'm becoming instead of just settling for who I am today.
Yeah.
And I think that's the beauty of being human, is that we get to in some way participate. It's our choice for sure, and we get to participate in the process of who we want to become.
Yeah.
And for us who follow God and serve Jesus, the idea is like our identity is rooted in him, and I know that he's calling us to a higher reality, higher standards. You know, we're in a study of Ephesians right now. We're taking our whole community through Ephesians, and we're having a hard time ending the series because there's so much in there. But one of the most beautiful things about that is Paul talked about where the greatest mystery is that everyone is accepted and loved and is an heir and is a citizen. And the context of the letter, he's writing to a group of people that were rejected on every front in their life. And Paul said, God's accepted you, he's chosen you, and you're an heir, and you're a citizen. So what God provides to us is all the existential longing of being loved and accepted. And one of the things for us that follow Jesus is like, I want to move more and more into that reality, not only intellectually, but actually experientially, because then that changes the outcome of everything I do in my life. Snap. And so for those that follow Jesus, the scriptures provide so much of the who you're becoming, and who Jesus designed you to be. And so I think that's where I get so much excitement and hope for as I approach my 50s. I'm like, I'm so excited to see who I become in the next decade of my life instead of just who I am today. And when I look at the 40s, I would also say my 40s had been the hardest decade in my life. I thought my 30s were challenging. 40s crushes as far as difficulty and pain and all the stuff. But I also say, but it's actually been one of the best decades as well. Wow. So that's an interesting cool paradigm, because I think sometimes we think the best things in life where there's no process or no journey or there's no pain or there's nothing. And we think, it's just everything is great. My perspective has drastically changed to my hardest decade in my life, which is 8 years in this decade, is also my most favorite. So I think that's something we have to I think we have to embrace that concept too. Yeah,
I love that, because it's one of the things that I've been thinking about recently is obviously God creating us as his workmanship, his masterpiece. And I think about the intricacy that an artist would create a masterpiece and the time that's spent and the detail. And then life happens and that artwork gets muck on it and maybe gets thrown around and breaks and all of the things. And to allow, especially when we talk about like looking in the mirror, but also spending time in the Word and knowing that he accepts us. And so when he accepts us and he allows us to be in situations that help us grow, he's just cleaning off that art. He's cleaning off the original design of how he made us. Mm-hmm. And to be okay with that and not to look at it as I failed and I need to grow and almost robotic, but to allow to understand, the master that created me is chiseling some things off so that to bring out the beauty that he defined in my life and created. And I think that's such a cool place to be. Mm-hmm. And it allows me to be okay with sometimes the chiseling when it's hard. Because it's hard sometimes.
I think the idea of who we're becoming should also be married to the concept that Jesus is actually walking with us in that, instead of he's out there somewhere and we're trying to get to him.
Yes.
So I think that's a different paradigm as well. Like, he's actually right here walking with me.
Yeah.
And he is saying, I see this about you. And so I think that's some helpful frameworks too, instead of it being, man, I'm trying so hard to get to where he is.
Yeah.
He's actually right here.
That's cool.
And that's the beauty of it. Is we get to allow Jesus create us into a new human, as Paul talked about in Ephesians. We're moving from an old creation to a new creation, from an old human to a new human.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of our faith of following Jesus.
Yeah, it's cool. I love that. I love this talk. I hope it encouraged the people that are listening, because I just want you to give grace in your life, but also listen, right? To those that are around you and that you've allowed to be in your life. So
yeah, you're not, when you get into your 40s, you're not going, what, this over the hill?
yeah.
You're not, no, you're still going.
You're still going.
So let's not settle for this is it. And
then we just decline.
No, we're actually continuing. And I think that's exciting.
Good.
So
Yeah.
thanks, guys, for listening. Thanks, Shayna.
Follow us.
Subscribe.
Subscribe.
Tell your friends about it. Please subscribe. And have a great week.
Yeah. Have a great day. We'll see you later.